My name is Malek from Knack Training, and in today's Everyday Office video, we're going to go into a very in-depth, interesting visualization problem in Microsoft Excel and come out of this with a really cool little chart type. So normally when I would want to visualize something like the percentage of capacity that the reservoirs in California are at, I might use a little drop-down menu, allow me to switch between January 2010 and January 2012 to show that in January 2012 the reservoirs were at 19,000 gallons, which out of the 27,000 net gallons is 70% of capacity. And so I'd have this little gauge here with a little percentage on it. I feel pretty good about things. But earlier today, I was watching a YouTube video and I saw somebody put up this screen. So you can see I was watching this easily create infographics in Power BI video. And just in passing, they were showing the Power BI interface and they were showing this liquid fill gauge thing. And I thought to myself, oh, that's a really nice type of illustration to have in some dashboards, right? If you were a gas company, or if you were a water company, or if you had to demonstrate how much of your budget was spent on water, different things like that, you could see where having this little gauge here with a percentage in it, that would be helpful. So I decided to figure out how to build this thing. And it basically takes a few different steps to the process. The first is that if you want a gauge that looks like this one, you can't just make a round chart that fills up vertically like this. Excel just doesn't have that. Excel does have a pie chart, but a pie chart fills around the circle. It doesn't fill vertically up the circle. Instead, what you're looking for is a column chart that fills up. So we're going to need something that's like a cutout circle to go around the rectangular chart type in order to make this happen. Now, unfortunately, Microsoft doesn't have this tool in Excel yet, but in PowerPoint we do have. Let me just go ahead and make another new slide here real quick. On this new slide, and let me go ahead and just put something in the background so that it'll be easier to see this. Okay, so if I want to make a circular gauge like this one, we have a tool in PowerPoint that allows us to create a rectangle. So I'll go to Insert, to Shapes, make myself a rectangle, like maybe this big. Make sure that that rectangle is filled with, let's say, white for the purposes of our setup in our chart here. I'm going to go with a no outline around the outside edge of this rectangle, and now we need to cut a circle out of it. So what I'm going to do is go back up to Insert, go back to Shapes again, and this time add a circle. And make sure that you hold down Shift on your keyboard while you're drawing the circle out. And then what you need to make sure you do is that you line up the rectangle and the circle so that they're perfectly centered on top of each other. So I can click on the circle, I can hold down Shift and click on the rectangle, and just click the Align button right up here on the Format tab to align center and then to align middle. Okay, so now I know that the white rectangle and the blue circle are perfectly aligned against one another. And now in new versions of PowerPoint, we have this button for Merge Shapes. So we can just choose something like Combine, for example, or Intersect, or something along those lines in order to cut the circle out of the rectangle. But before we do that, we do have to click onto the rectangle first, then hold down Shift and click onto the circle. And the point of this, going to the rectangle first and then the circle second, is that the circle then is basically the scissors for the rectangle as opposed to the other way around. By clicking the rectangle first, you're saying that's the dominant shape, and then the circle is the shape that acts upon the rectangle. And there it is. Now we've got a nice board with a hole cut out of it, basically. We think of this as our mask. So we just copy this and then move over to Excel and paste it. And just to illustrate this, this is what we're going for in the long run. This is what I've created previously. So you can see here I've got my little drop-down menu and I can switch to different months and figure out what capacity it's at, and you can see the little ripple of water there. I like it. And this is, of course, that board. So that's the first thing we made. I just made it because I had to make it outside of Excel, so you might as well do it before you get into the nitty-gritty. So I just tossed that over here. You can't really see it because it's a giant white rectangle sitting on a white background, but it's there. And we'll just leave that sitting there so we can come back to this in a little bit. So next up, how did I make the calculations and things so that the 56% shows up and so that there's this vertical gauge thing? Well, the first thing I'm going to want to do is create a little lookup to the different periods that I'm interested in so that I can choose, let's say, July of 2009 and have the numbers change. So I'll come over here, I'll put in period. And the period is just any of these labels from this table up here at the top of the screen. So the way we make that happen is with data validation. So we go to the data tab, top of the screen, click on data validation about halfway across, and choose to allow not any value in this box, but one of a list of values. And of course, the list is July 2009, January 2010, etc., etc. So I go to list, I choose the source, and I just highlight from July of 2009 all the way across until I get to July of 2017, and click OK. And so that's how I get that little drop-down menu there. That's good. Notice that when I choose January of 2011, for example, that it's a number value. That's because it's not been formatted yet. So let's take a second here, go up to the Home tab, and just make sure that it formats itself as a date. Okay. Notice that this formatting is not the same as that formatting. I'm just going to click over here on this type of formatting, use my format painter, and paint it onto that one. So it just says January 2011. I'll go ahead and format paint this too. Looking good. Now in January of 2011, we're at a certain percent of capacity. So I'll just copy this over here. What percent of capacity are we at? Well, here's the thing. We need to look up January of 2011 and find out what the levels were in January of 2011. So the way we make that happen is with an index and match function, so that we can tell it that it could be any of these levels in this row right here, but we have to look in the row above to figure out which one it is. So into cell A46 right here, I'm just going to type in = index, and the array of values, the possible values that we're looking at are all the possible levels. So that's a B2 all the way across through to R2. B2 to R2, comma. What row are we in? Well, it's only one row, so just type in a 1 there. Now, what column are we in? The only thing that I have to tell you about what column we're in is if I select the period up here, you need to know what column that is. So that's the match function. Use the match function to look for the value of January 2011, sitting right there, comma, in all of these cells from B1 through to R1. The last thing we're going to fill in here is (0) so that it finds an exact match, not a close enough match without going over, just in case. And we close off the parentheses at that point. When I hit enter, it gives me, for January of 2011, 18,900. And sure enough, 18,900 is the level that was in 2011. So now I switch to July 2012. It says 20,500, and sure enough, that's a match. But I didn't want the raw number, I wanted the percentage. So I'll just open this up and do a little divide by, and I can pick any of these values because capacity hasn't changed. If I wanted to, I could look up what the capacity was in any given year if we develop new reservoirs or things like that. But if we assume that we have not changed the capacity, you can just reference any one of those capacities. And that gives me the 75%, and I'll just format that nicely. So in July of 2012, they were at 75% of capacity. In January of 2013, they were at 64% of capacity. Now, if I wanted a hard line going across this, all I have to do here is then say, what is the remainder? And the remainder, let's just format this the same way here, is whatever 100 is, so that's 100%, that's the number 1, minus whatever the percent capacity is, like so. So that I can say, oh, there it is, okay. So that I can then say that the percent of capacity is 64%, the remaining capacity was 36%. So it's just the other part of that. And here's why I'm doing that, because what I want is a vertical gauge that is always 100%, and then it's just this value out of, subtracting from 100%. So if I now look up January of 2016, the percent of capacity was 28%, and the remainder was 72%. And when I do this, I can now click on Insert up at the top of my screen, go to my column chart drop-down menu, and I want a 100% stacked column. That's because I just assume that everything is out of 100%, right? Now, as you can see, it's putting them side by side, but all I have to do now is click on Switch Row and Column, and you can see, and let's just take off all this other garbage here. Don't need that, don't need that, don't need that. All we have here is just a simple gauge. It says this part is 28% and this part is 72%. And if I were to shift this around and make this July of 2014, this part is 42%, this part is 58%. Now I don't need to see this top part, so I'm going to click on the top part of this bar, go up to Format, and tell it to fill with no fill color. And that's the first step right there. Now all I have to do is switch this around, and it's just the bar is whatever height it is to match up with that. Okay. All right, so next up, we need to figure out how to, and let's just take that little mask there and put it right on top. There it is. So that's basically what we're shooting for there, is to have that circle fill up part of the way from the rectangle, but we're not quite there yet. So how do we make the ripple now? Well, the first thing you need to know is that whenever you select a part of your chart, that segment of your chart is filled currently with just a solid color, but you can fill it with shapes, with pictures, things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, you know what, most of this is just a normal column. No big deal. And most of this top part is just a normal column as well. But it's that layer right where the 61 meets the 39, right about there, I need a ripple. I need a horizontal ripple right there. So what I do here to make this happen is I'm going to spread these two apart. And in the middle, let's just take this chart out here. In the middle, I say, okay, well, what I need is a normal 10%. So I'll say this is the ripple part in the middle. And the ripple part in the middle is always 10%. But of course, now we have definitely 110% right here. We don't want 110%. Instead, I'm going to say the percent of capacity is whatever this is minus half of the ripple. So 5% of it is going to come out of the total capacity, and the other 5% is going to come out of the remainder over here. So I'm just going to come over here to the left, and at the end of all of this, I just take this number and I subtract 0.05 from it. So that makes it 56% instead of 61%. And the remainder is now equal to 100%, the number 1, minus 56% minus the 10%. So the remainder is now 34%. And just to make sure we're on top of this, this whole thing always adds up to 100%. So what we did here is instead of saying there's two parts, there's the capacity and there's the remainder, the percent of capacity and the remainder, now we're saying there's three parts. There is the middle 10%, which is just going to be the ripple, just going to be the water effect. And then there's going to be the bottom part and there's going to be the top part. And there's going to be most of what they normally are, but subtract 5% over here and subtract 5% over here. Let's just go ahead and make this look good. Looking good. Okay. So now we go back and we do the exact same thing. We highlight these cells. We go to Insert. We choose the column chart type. We choose a 100% stacked column. And we switch the rows and columns. And that's what we're looking for right there. This is the unfilled capacity. This is the filled capacity. And this is that wiggle room between the filled and the unfilled. And if I go in here and I say, show me a different period, you see that it slides up, but this middle 10% is always there. Slides down, slides up, slides down. The middle 10% is always there. That's what we're looking for right there. Now remember, we don't need the chart title. We don't need this, we don't need this, we don't need this. Goodbye. We also don't need the color in the unfilled part of the chart. So I'm just going to come up here, go to my Format tab, and tell it to fill with nothing. But this guy right here, I don't want it to be a separate gray wedge. What I want it to be is a nice blue ripply thing. So to make that happen, here's what we do. We go to Insert, we go to Shapes, just draw a rectangle. In fact, I'm going to draw a rectangle right on top of that 10% rectangle, just so that it matches up pretty well. And you can see it's that same shade of blue. If it wasn't the same shade of blue, we'd now come up here, make sure that it was the same shade of blue. I don't need an outline around the outside edge, so I take the outline off. And then here's the fun part. When you make a shape, one of the things not a lot of people know you can do, and let me zoom in so that it's easier for you to see, is right up here at the top, I can click on Edit Shape and tell it that I want to edit some points. And I can come in here and I can add an extra point here and pull this up. And then add an extra point here and pull it down. Add a point here and pull it up. Add a point here and pull it down. You see it's very pointy still, but we're getting there. And then what you do is you see these little handles, these little white boxes. You just pull these out and it softens, it rounds out those corners right there. So I'm just pulling these out and making it nice and round and squishy. These are what are called Bezier curves. If you want to see them really in action, you'd want to go to like Adobe Illustrator or something, but you know, we can make Bezier curves in Excel. Why not? There it is. Okay, so maybe you think that's the ugliest water ripple you've ever seen in your life. Not really relevant right now. The point of this is that we have a rectangle that is going to go in for the gray box right there, that gray part of the rectangle. So let's try it out. We click on that beautiful little ripple I just made, the best thing I've ever made in my whole life. We copy that and we click on the gray box and just paste it. And you see that? Do you see how easy that is? It now, because it's the same color, blends in with the segment of the column down below. Well, we're looking pretty good. Now, the other thing I want to do is, you know, if this were a circle, right, we'd need to make sure that it probably goes out farther to the sides. So let's try that out. Let's zoom out just for a second here. Let's put this someplace. We'll put this over here. Good. And let's just take that white rectangle here, this mask that we were talking about earlier, copy it and paste it right on top. There we go. And you can see that the circle goes out too far to the sides, right? So we line up the circle and then we go back to the chart. We click on that little segment of the chart here, and I'm just going to format this. You can use the keyboard shortcut Control-1 and just make the gap width significantly smaller. And that makes the column sort of wider. And you see how wide it is now? It's wide enough to fill up the rest of that hole right there. That's what we're looking for. Beautiful. Okay. So again, we have the ability to use the drop-down menu here and see the numbers change. Let's pick a really different number. There it is. And we see that that water ripple stays on top, that the column goes all the way across the circle and fills that up all the way up. Now I went and did a few other things here. I put in a black circle that went around the whole thing. You could definitely do that. Just a quick circular shape. Try to make it roughly the size of the rest of the chart. Have no fill on the inside, but have like a black circle around the outside. And you can just select those two things and align them against one another. Something like that would be okay. What else could we do? Oh, the text box. So you need to have what the real capacity is. In this case, it was 61% for July of 2009, you know, things like that. All you have to do is you figure out what the real capacity is, which in this case is equal to this number plus 0.05. Make that a percentage. Okay, so it's really 75% in July of 2012, and it's 60% in July of 2013, and it's 39% in July of 2015. So now what you're going to do is a linked text box here. So all you have to do to make a linked text box happen is go up to Insert at the top of the screen, grab your text box tool, draw a text box like so, and instead of typing something into the text box, you come up here to the formula bar, click in the formula bar, type in a little equal sign, and then select the 39% that's there and hit enter. That puts the 39% from your spreadsheet into the text box, which you can then format to your heart's content. Make it a little bigger, make it centered, and then put that sucker right on top of there. Let's make it really big. And then what I did is I actually made the fill white, but then had like a gray line around the outside edge. So you can select the text box, go up here to your drawing tools, and you can choose your text fill, like white, for example, and you can choose your text outline, like a black, for example, or maybe like a darkish gray, something like that. So it helps it stand out, but then when the percentage goes up high enough, like 56%, it looks like white on blue, but when it goes down low enough, like 38%, it still stands out. Yeah, so that's what we did there. All you have to do is make sure that there is a 10% or so wedge in the middle, and then replace that with the aesthetic that you're looking for. In my case, it was a ripple, and that ripple might be well done or not. That's up to your visual cues, but the end result is a really nice little visualization.